At 11:23 in the morning on September 17, 1944, Private First Class Eddie Kowalski crouched inside his Sherman tank near the French village of Aracourt. A German Panzer IV had just appeared 400 yards away, its turret beginning to rotate toward them. Kowalski's gunner was already dead, and his commander was wounded. Kowalski himself was a loader, not a gunner. He had never fired the 75mm gun in combat, never aimed it, and had received no formal training for that role. The Panzer fired first. The shell passed so close that the Sherman rocked sideways. Kowalski tasted blood in his mouth, and his ears rang from the shock. The turret smelled of cordite and blood. Lieutenant Carson, the commander, slumped against the radio, pressing a field dressing to his bleeding shoulder. He looked at Kowalski and said a single word: "Shoot." Kowalski moved into the gunner's seat, his hands trembling. Through the periscope, he saw the Panzer reloading about 20 seconds before it could fire again. Standard tank doctrine called for aiming at the lower hull to damage the tracks and immobilize the target. But Kowalski could not see the lower hull. Trees obstructed the view. Only the turret was visible, and he had no idea where to place his shot. The Sherman's gun sight was calibrated for ranges between 600 and 2,000 yards. The Panzer was only 400 yards away, too close for the sight to adjust properly. Kowalski would have to estimate the aim manually, without visual guidance. As he steadied himself, his foot struck something on the turret floor. A broken hand mirror, about 5 inches wide, cracked down the center. It had belonged to their gunner, Corporal Hayes, who had used it for shaving and personal grooming. It had no tactical use. Until now. Kowalski picked up the mirror. The Panzer's gun barrel was leveling toward them. Perhaps 10 seconds remained. His vision narrowed, and his breathing quickened. Holding the mirror above the periscope at an angle, he looked through the sight again. The reflection allowed him to see farther down. Now he could observe the Panzer's lower hull, including the driver's viewport, where the armor was only 50mm thick. Adjusting the mirror, he aligned the crosshairs. The Panzer fired. Its shell penetrated the Sherman's frontal glacis plate and exited through the engine deck without detonating. It was pure luck. A few inches higher, and Kowalski would have been killed. But the tank was still operational. Kowalski pressed the firing trigger. The 75mm gun discharged with a deafening blast, filling the turret with smoke. The Sherman recoiled backward. When the air cleared, the Panzer stood motionless, black smoke rising from its driver's hatch. One shot had destroyed it, guided by a broken mirror. Lieutenant Carson, bleeding heavily, stared at Kowalski. "What did you just do?" he asked. Kowalski had no time to answer. 2 more Panzers had appeared on the ridge, closer than the first 300 yards, perhaps less. Both turrets were turning toward the Sherman, their guns already loaded. Kowalski still held the mirror in his hand. The events that followed were not described in any training manual. The battle near Aracourt had begun 3 days earlier, on September 14, 1944. General Patton's Third Army had crossed into France, advancing rapidly toward the German border. Their movement was so fast that supply lines were stretched thin and fuel stocks were nearly depleted. But Patton valued momentum over logistics. The German command, meanwhile, was determined to stop him. The 5th Panzer Army assembled near Aracourt with more than 200 tanks, Panthers, Panzer IVs, and Tigers, the strongest armored forces Germany still had in the West. Their objective was to destroy the American spearhead, cut off Patton's advance, and drive the Americans back across the Moselle River. Facing them was the U.Z. 4th Armored Division. Its units were equipped mainly with M4 Shermans carrying 75mm guns. The Shermans were dependable and easy to repair, effective in infantry support, but not designed for head-to-head tank duels against German heavy armor. A Panther weighed 45 tons, a Sherman 33. The Panther's frontal armor was 80mm thick, sloped at 55 degrees. The Sherman's was 51mm. A Panther could destroy a Sherman at 2,000 yards. The Sherman had to close within 500 yards to penetrate the Panther's front plate. The odds were severe. In Normandy, American crews had learned this through costly experience. On average, 5 Shermans were lost for every Panther destroyed. German crews called the Sherman the Tommy Cooker, referring to how easily it burned after being hit. American soldiers grimly called it the Ronson, after the cigarette lighter that lights every time. Eddie Kowalski knew these statistics. Every loader did. The 4th Armored Division had already lost 47 Shermans since crossing the Moselle. His tank, call sign Bad News, had survived 6 previous battles, largely through luck. They had always attacked Panthers from the side or rear, never head-on, never at 400 yards, and never with the loader firing the gun. Until that day. The Sherman's disadvantage was not only its armor, but also its visibility. The gun sight functioned accurately at normal combat distances, from 600 to 1500 yards. At closer ranges, under 400 yards, the sight could not depress enough to target the enemy's lower hull. Only the upper turret was visible, and engaging a Panther's turret from the front was nearly futile. The armor, there was 110 millimeters thick enough to deflect almost any shell. Tank crews called this the dead zone. Too close to aim effectively, too far to ram the enemy. Doctrine advised reversing out of range, regaining distance, and finding a better angle of attack. But Kowalski could not reverse. 2 more panzers stood on the ridge about 300 yards away. If Kowalski attempted to reverse, the Sherman's thinner side armor would be exposed. If he stayed where he was, the German tanks could coordinate their fire and strike from both flanks, leaving no avenue of escape. Lieutenant Carson's radio came to life, battalion headquarters requesting a status report. Carson did not respond. His attention remained on Kowalski, who was still holding the cracked hand mirror above the gun sight with focused precision. The lead panzer fired. The shells struck the ground 20 yards short, sending dirt and smoke across the field. It was a ranging shot. The next round would be accurate. Kowalski had perhaps 8 seconds. He adjusted the mirror, watched the reflected image through the gun sight, and located the lower section of the enemy hull. The driver's viewport, a rectangular steel plate approximately 12 inches wide, was visible. A direct hit there would allow the 75mm shell to penetrate the crew compartment. Kowalski fired. The impact produced a violent explosion. This time it was not only smoke but fire. The Panzer's forward armor split apart, the driver's hatch detached, and flames rose nearly 30 feet high. The shell had struck the ammunition storage compartment. It was his second kill in 2 minutes. The remaining Panzer began to reverse, attempting to withdraw from range. Kowalski tracked its movement through the mirror, adjusting the angle as the target moved farther along the ridge. The distance closed to 400 yards, 4 minutes and 20 seconds, then 4 minutes and 50 seconds into the engagement. The German tank was trying to move beyond the dead zone, to reach a distance where its own optical sighting system could function correctly. Kowalski fired again. The round struck the Panzer's engine deck. The vehicle shuddered, rolled forward 10 yards, and came to a stop. Black smoke rose from the rear ventilation grills. The German crew abandoned the tank and ran toward the nearby tree line. Kowalski did not fire again. They were no longer a combat threat. 3 enemy tanks destroyed in 4 minutes with the aid of a broken mirror. Lieutenant Carson took the radio transmitter. His voice was unsteady. "Battalion, this is bad news. 3 enemy tanks destroyed, all confirmed kills." The line remained silent for several seconds before a response came. "Say again. Bad news. Did you say 3? Carson replied. "Affirmative. 3 Panzerfiers. 4 minutes." Another pause followed. "Bad news. What is your crew status?" Carson looked at Kowalski, then at the mirror in his hand, then toward the burning wrecks on the ridge. "Finally," he answered, "Battalion, you wouldn't believe me if I told you." Reports of the incident circulated quickly. By that afternoon, every tank commander in the 4th Armored Division had heard about what occurred near Aracourt, how a loader with no gunnery training had destroyed 3 German tanks in 4 minutes at close range, inside the dead zone, using a sight not designed for that purpose, and a 5-inch hand mirror. What few outside the division understood at the time was that the underlying issue was not new. The American tank crews had been reporting the same visibility problem for months. At ranges below 400 yards, the M4 Sherman's gun sight could not be lowered enough to bring the enemy's lower hull into view. Gunners could see turrets and open terrain, but not the vulnerable sections, the driver's viewport, the lower glacis plate, or other thinner armor points that could be penetrated effectively. The Sherman's periscope was positioned high within the turret, while the main gun sat lower. At long range, this alignment was sufficient. At close range, the geometry broke down, leaving gunners to fire without accurate reference. The consequences had been severe. In July 1944, a platoon from the 2nd Armored Division encountered 3 Panthers near Saint-Lô at a range of 300 yards. The Shermans never fired a single effective shot. All 5 tanks were destroyed within 90 seconds. The German tanks occupied hull-down positions, with only their turrets visible. The American gunners aimed where they believed the hulls to be, but each round either missed or ricocheted. A similar incident occurred in August near Mortagne. 4 Shermans engaged 2 Panzer IVs at approximately 250 yards. Attempting to flank, the American tanks advanced rapidly, but by the time they reached firing range, 3 were destroyed. Only 1 managed to position itself for a side shot. The tactical flaw was clear. By moving close enough to attempt to flank, the Shermans entered the dead zone. Within that distance, the German tanks maintained a full view, while the Americans could not target accurately. The Ordnance Department was aware of the issue. Field reports throughout the summer of 1944 described it repeatedly. Tank commanders requested improved gun sights, adjustable periscopes, or any modification that would allow proper aiming at close range. The official responses were consistent under review, being evaluated, or future modification pending. None arrived in time for the ongoing operations. Crews adapted in their own ways. Some tried placing ammunition boxes beneath the gunner's seat to raise the viewing position, but the altered angle made accurate aiming impossible. Others marked their periscopes with grease pencils to estimate aiming offsets based on prior engagements. This helped slightly under ideal conditions, flat terrain, known enemy models, and adequate time for adjustment, but in combat, time was always limited. Staff Sergeant Mike DiMaggio of the 3rd Armored Division experimented with a dental mirror, a small circular type mounted on a swivel handle. Working with his loader, he tried to find an angle that would reflect the lower portion of the battlefield into view. The idea had merit, but the mirror's field of vision was too narrow, only about 20 degrees, making it impossible to track moving targets. 2 days later, DiMaggio's tank was hit. He survived with burns to his hands and face and spent 3 weeks in a field hospital. When he returned to duty, he no longer used the mirror. The 4th Armored Division pursued a formal solution. They requested expedited delivery of the M4A3 variant, which featured a lower-mounted periscope and improved sighting angles at short range. The request was submitted in August 1944. The response arrived in September. Production already allocated to priority theaters, estimated delivery in December 1944, 4 months away. But the battle near Aracourt was taking place immediately. On September 16th, Lieutenant Colonel Craig Neighbors, commanding officer of the 37th Tank Battalion, convened a meeting to address the situation. Every tank commander attended. Abrams outlined the situation. The 5th Panzer Army was pressing hard, and engagement ranges were shrinking to 200 yards or less. Fighting increasingly occurred in villages, in woods, and in terrain where long-range gunnery mattered little. Abrams warned that this trend left little margin for error. If they did not solve the problem immediately, they risked losing a large portion of their tanks before reaching the German border. One commander proposed falling back whenever possible to restore distance and avoid the dead zone. Abrams rejected that option. He said, "Patton does not back up, neither do we." Another commander argued for ambush tactics, striking from the flank and avoiding frontal confrontations. Abrams responded, "That works until it does not. What happens when they see you first?" No one offered a satisfactory answer. The meeting adjourned at 4:30 in the afternoon. 16 hours later, Eddie Kowalski would use a broken hand mirror to address the immediate problem, but first he had to survive the night because the Germans were not finished at Ericourt. At 11:40 in the morning, Lieutenant Carson radioed battalion headquarters and reported the engagement. 3 panzers destroyed in 4 minutes, a loader using a hand mirror to aim. The reply was immediate: "Hold position, do not move, battalion commander is coming." Lieutenant Colonel Abrams arrived 30 minutes later. He climbed onto Bad News and looked inside the turret. Kowalski remained in the gunner seat with the cracked mirror on his lap. Abrams examined the mirror 5 inches across, split down the middle, and then ordered Kowalski to demonstrate. Kowalski assumed the gunner position, held the mirror above the periscope at an angle, and showed the reflection of the ground out to roughly 300 yards. Abrams watched without visible reaction and instructed him to repeat the demonstration more slowly. Kowalski explained the geometry. The periscope looked straight ahead, while the gun barrel pointed slightly downward, a configuration that functioned at normal ranges but failed at close range. The mirror altered the geometry by reflecting a view from a point approximately 8 inches higher, allowing the lower battlefield and vulnerable hull areas to appear in the sight picture. Abrams asked how Kowalski determined aim. Kowalski replied that he used the existing crosshairs but observed the reflected image rather than the direct periscope view. He adjusted the mirror by trial and error, tilting to achieve the correct view for different ranges. Abrams fell silent for a moment, looking between the 3 burning panzers on the ridge, the mirror, and Kowalski. When asked how long it had taken him to discover the method, Kowalski answered, "About 5 seconds. Right before the first panzer hit us, Abrams descended from the tank and gathered 12 nearby tank commanders. He displayed the mirror and announced, 'This loader just solved our dead zone problem with this.' One commander laughed and called it a shaving mirror. Abrams did not smile. He replied, 'That shaving mirror destroyed 3 panzers in 4 minutes from the front, at ranges where your gun sights do not work. Now pay attention.' He ordered Kowalski to demonstrate again. All 12 watched as Kowalski showed the correct angle, the hold, how to adjust for range, and how to track a moving target through the reflection. The technique appeared improvised and awkward, but the wrecked enemy tanks on the ridge confirmed its effectiveness. Commanders raised practical concerns: the mirror's limited field of view and the risk of it breaking or falling. Kowalski replied that a small field of view sufficed to find and follow the hull, and that a broken mirror would return a crew to the original handicap. Abrams issued a decisive order. Every tank in the battalion must have a mirror by that night. He authorized taking mirrors from any available source. Within 2 hours, the 4th Armored Division organized a mirror collection operation. Tank crews entered Ericourt village, solicited mirrors from residents with offers of cigarettes, chocolate, or money. Some villagers refused, most complied. By dusk 47, Shermans had mirrors mounted or taped near their gun sights. Possessing a mirror, however, was not equivalent to proficiency. The angle had to be precise. Too steep and the view showed dirt, too shallow and the view showed sky. The mirror also had to be held steady while the tank moved and under fire. Kowalski spent the afternoon training other loaders in grip and technique. 2 fingers on the mirror edge, thumb at the back, angle roughly 40 degrees for 300 yards, while the other hand controlled the gun. For crews unable to hold the mirror steady, he advised taping it in place as a static solution, noting that tapes reduced flexibility and were ineffective during movement. By evening, 20 loaders had practiced the method. Some adapted quickly, others required more time. The technique demanded coordination. Observe the reflection, manipulate the gun, and adjust the mirror simultaneously. At 6 o'clock in the evening, German artillery initiated a barrage around Aérocourt that lasted 30 minutes. When it subsided, the radio reported multiple armored contacts moving south, at least a dozen tanks at approximately 1,200 yards, and closing. Abrams ordered all tanks to hold position and let the enemy close the range. The German force, composed largely of Panthers, advanced, cautiously expecting standard long-range engagement. The 4th Armored Division withheld fire and observed the range close. 1,100 yards, 900 yards, 700 yards. At 500 yards, the Germans halted and began to seek cover, realizing the situation had changed. Abrams then commanded, "Open fire." 17 Shermans fired together, targeting hulls rather than turrets because, with the mirror technique, crews could now observe and engage the lower, vulnerable areas of the enemy tanks. 11 Panthers were destroyed in the first minute, and the remaining German tanks withdrew rapidly. The 4th Armored Division did not lose a single tank during that engagement. The mirror technique, however, carried an unforeseen drawback that nearly cost Eddie Kowalski his life the following morning. At dawn on September 18, 1944, Kowalski sat in the gunner seat, with the mirror positioned and ready. A lone Panzer IV appeared at 300 yards, an optimal distance for the mirror method. Kowalski angled the mirror, observed the reflected image, aligned the crosshairs on the Panzer's hull, and fired. The round missed by a considerable margin, impacting about 20 feet to the left and throwing up dirt and grass. The Panzer returned fire. The shell struck Bad News's frontal plate, penetrating roughly 3 inches before being stopped. The Sherman lurched. Kowalski's head struck the gun sight and blood flowed from his nose. He fired again. That round also missed, this time to the right. The Panzer remained essentially stationary, an accessible target at 300 yards, yet Kowalski could not hit it. Lieutenant Carson shouted, "What is wrong?" Kowalski could not explain. The mirror reflected the hull clearly, and the crosshairs appeared aligned, but the shots did not connect. He adjusted the mirror and fired a third time. The round fell 50 yards short and skipped along the ground. The Panzer closed to 250 yards. Kowalski could now see the commander's head protruding from the turret hatch. He fired another shot. It flew high and screamed over the turret into the trees behind. Carson keyed the radio. "All tanks, we have a problem. The mirror is not working." Yet, the mirror method was functioning for other crews. 2 neighboring Shermans opened on the same Panzer and scored hits. The German tank smoked, and its crew abandoned it. Kowalski watched the crew run and still did not understand why his rounds had missed. When he studied his mirror closely, the cause became clear. The crack down the center had widened overnight, and the 2 halves now sat at slightly different angles. Under sunlight, the mirror produced 2 separate images. The gun sight crosshairs lined up with the left reflection, while the actual target appeared at the position of the right reflection. The split surface effectively provided 2 conflicting views and displaced his aim. Kowalski took adhesive tape from the ammunition rack and bound the mirror's edges, pulling the halves together. The fracture remained visible, but the 2 reflections merged sufficiently for a practical alignment. He tested the makeshift repair on a tree stump at 400 yards and fired. The round struck 2 feet left of the stump. It was an improvement, though still imprecise. The underlying issue was geometric. A flat mirror reflects light from a single plane and produces one accurate image. A fractured mirror yields multiple reflections at slightly different angles. In gunnery, even a fraction of a degree error produces yard-scale misses at combat ranges. Kowalski recognized an operational risk. Mirrors would crack under the repeated shock, vibration, and internal impacts produced by the 75mm gun and the harsh tank environment. He radioed other tanks. "Check your mirrors. Replace any that are cracked. 3 vehicles reported fractured mirrors, and 2 crews had already noted accuracy problems they had attributed to nerves or poor technique. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams issued immediate orders: inspect every mirror before combat and replace any with cracks, chips, or imperfections. Loaders would carry backup mirrors, and commanders would retain spares. Some crews mounted 2 mirrors side by side to permit rapid switching. The solution exposed a basic limitation. Glass offered the clearest reflection, but remained fragile inside a combat tank. Alternatives were imperfect. Polished steel mirrors resisted shattering, but yielded dimmer, less precise reflections. Acrylic mirrors were lightweight and less likely to break, but they scratched easily and accumulated residue from gun smoke that could not be cleaned without damage. After several engagements, an acrylic surface could become so clouded as to be unusable. In short, glass provided the best optical fidelity but remained vulnerable to battlefield stresses. Carson asked Kowalski, "How long before every mirror in this division cracks?" Kowalski looked at his taped mirror and the distorted reflection within it. "Maybe a week," he said. "Less if we keep fighting." Carson nodded. "Then what?" Kowalski replied. "Then we're back where we started, blind in the dead zone." Abrams understood this as well. He sent a message to division headquarters requesting proper equipment, adjustable periscopes, angled sights, anything designed for close-range targeting. The reply arrived within hours. "No modifications available. Use field-expedient solutions." In other words, the crews were on their own, but their improvised methods were failing. The mirrors that made the difference at Aracourt were fragile, and the Germans were adapting. They noticed that American Shermans were fighting differently, closing distance, hitting weak points with remarkable accuracy. German tank commanders adjusted their tactics. They stopped pressing into short-range fights and began engaging at 600, 700, even 800 yards, where the mirror technique offered no advantage and the Panther's superior gun and armor dominated. On September 19th, the 4th Armored Division lost 8 Shermans, not because the mirror method failed, but because the Germans refused to let them fight close enough to use it. The innovation that had saved Kowalski's life was becoming obsolete. Only 3 days after its discovery and rapid adoption across the division, its effectiveness was already fading. Worse, Kowalski soon realized another threat, one no one had considered. The mirrors were not just fragile, they were visible. German gunners had begun spotting the glint of reflected light from loaders holding mirrors above periscopes. Those flashes revealed the tank's positions and even the location of the crew. Once identified, German gunners aimed for the turret to kill the loader before he could take aim. It was working. Abrams convened another meeting with all tank commanders present. The atmosphere had changed. 3 days earlier, there had been excitement and confidence. Now, there was concern. Abrams began, "The Germans know. They're watching for mirrors. They're targeting loaders." One commander asked if they should stop using them. Abrams replied, "And go back to being blind under 400 yards. No, we adapt." Adaptation, however, was complicated. The mirror had to be exposed to function. It needed light and a clear angle to reflect the battlefield into the gun sight. Any position that achieved that also made it visible to the enemy. Some crews tried keeping their mirrors hidden until the last possible moment, only raising them when the target was within range. It occasionally worked, but demanded speed and precision that combat rarely allowed. The slightest delay meant a missed shot. Others painted their mirrors matte black to reduce glare. The measure helped slightly but darkened the reflection, making the image harder to read in smoke or low light. The trade-off was poor visibility both ways. Staff Sergeant Mike DiMaggio, the same gunner who had experimented with a dentist's mirror earlier that summer, suggested a new idea: mount mirrors permanently inside the turret, at fixed angles, calibrated for a specific range, perhaps 350 yards. That way, there would be no movement, no visible flash, and less risk to the loader. Abrams approved testing. Maintenance crews removed 5 Shermans from active duty and installed mirrors at varying angles. At the calibrated distance, the results were promising, accurate within 6 inches at 350 yards. But outside that range, accuracy declined sharply. At 300 yards, shots struck high. At 400, low. The fixed mirrors could not adapt to changing distances, and battlefield ranges were rarely constant. Handheld mirrors remained more flexible, able to adjust on the fly, but they were still visible and dangerous to use. The division faced an impossible choice: use handheld mirrors and risk casualties, use fixed mirrors and lose versatility, or abandon the mirrors entirely and return to blind firing at close range. Carson asked Kowalski for his opinion. Kowalski looked at his still cracked, taped mirror, clouded, barely functional. "I think we need something built for tanks," he said. "Not for bathrooms," Carson replied. "We're not getting that. Not from ordnance, not anytime soon." Kowalski nodded. "Then we keep using what we have, even if it gets you killed." He paused, thinking of Hollis and the shell that had nearly destroyed his tank. "The Germans are killing us anyway," he said quietly. "At least with the mirror, I can fight back." That night, Abrams made a decision. The 4th Armored Division would continue to use handheld mirrors, adjustable and visible, but under strict new protocols. Loaders were to raise mirrors only when absolutely necessary, only when engagement was imminent. The rest of the time they were to stay low and hidden, avoiding detection. It was a compromise, not a solution, but it kept the method in use for several more days. For 3 additional days, the 4th Armored fought using mirror-assisted gunnery. They destroyed 41 German tanks and lost 19 of their own, still an improvement over earlier losses, though less decisive than those first engagements when the Germans had not yet understood the tactic. By September 23rd, the Battle of Aracourt was ending. The 5th Panzer Army, suffering heavy losses, withdrew eastward. Patton's advance continued. The 4th Armored pressed toward the German border. The dead zone problem persisted, but was now understood and partially mitigated. Crews knew when to employ the mirror technique and when to rely on other tactics. Kowalski survived, and so did bad news. They fought through France, into Germany, and eventually into Czechoslovakia. Kowalski kept his cracked mirror throughout, taped and retaped, scratched but serviceable. It saved his life 4 more times before the war's end. The mirror technique never entered official doctrine. It was never mentioned in training manuals or recognized by the Ordnance Department. It remained an improvised, temporary field innovation, forgotten by most, except those who used it. That changed half a century later when a historian discovered Lieutenant Carson's after-action report in the National Archives. The report had sat for 6 months in a filing cabinet at 3rd Army headquarters, unread amid thousands of others from the war's final months. In March 1945, a young officer named Captain Robert Hayes was assigned to compile lessons learned from armored combat in Europe. Reviewing hundreds of reports, he found Carson's on page 417 of a thick stack. It described the mirror technique in detail, complete with diagrams, eyewitness accounts from 12 tank commanders, and combat data. According to the report, the 4th Armored Division destroyed 87 German tanks using mirror-assisted gunnery between September 17th and October 3rd, 1,944, while losing 31 Shermans. The resulting kill ratio, nearly 3-to-1, was the best of any American armored division in France during that period. Hayes forwarded the report to the Ordnance Department with a formal recommendation. Captain Hayes' recommendation was clear: investigate the technique, develop purpose-built optical equipment, issue it to all armored divisions. Standard equipment, not field expedient, not improvised engineered. The Ordnance Department's reply arrived in April 1945. It read, "Interesting but impractical. Close-range tank combat is becoming obsolete. Future doctrine emphasizes long-range gunnery and air support. No. Development recommended. 3 weeks later, the war in Europe ended. The report was returned to the filing cabinet, and Hayes moved on to other assignments. The mirror technique ended with the war, remembered only by a few who had used it. Eddie Kowalski was one of them. He kept his cracked mirror after being discharged in November 1945. He brought it home to Pittsburgh, placed it in a shoebox in his basement, and rarely mentioned it again. He did not expect anyone to care, and no one did not in 1945, not in 1950, not even during the Korean War, when American tanks once again fought in confined terrain where long-range gunnery offered little advantage. The newer M26 Pershing and M46 Patton featured improved optics and gun depression, reducing but not eliminating the dead zone. Still, nobody thought about mirrors. In 1973, military historian Dr. James Whitmore began researching small unit innovations from the Second World War. His focus was not on large technological advances like radar or atomic research, but on minor field modifications, improvised solutions created when standard equipment failed. During his work, he found Carson's after-action report by chance. Reading it 3 times, he could hardly believe that American tankers had solved a gunnery problem with something as ordinary as a bathroom mirror, and that the event was documented only in one overlooked report. Whitmore traced surviving members of the 4th Armored Division and located 12 men who had used the mirror technique. 8 agreed to be interviewed. Among them was Eddie Kowalski. At the time, he was 51, employed as a machinist, a father of 3, and rarely spoke about the war. When asked why the method had never entered official doctrine, Kowalski replied, "Because it was stupid. A hand mirror? Who's going to put that in a manual?" Whitmore countered, "But it worked." Kowalski answered, "It worked because we were desperate, because we didn't have anything better. You think the army wants to admit their equipment was so bad that soldiers had to use bathroom mirrors to fight." Whitmore published his findings in a small military history journal in 1976. Circulation was limited around 3,000 readers. The article mentioned the mirror technique in only 2 paragraphs, acknowledging it as an interesting footnote. It drew little attention. Tank doctrine continued to advance. Improved optics, stabilized fire control systems, and eventually computer-assisted targeting. By the 1,980 seconds, the M1 Abrams could engage enemy armor at any distance and from any angle. The dead zone problem no longer existed for American tanks. Yet the underlying principle remained significant: improvisation under pressure, adaptation with limited resources, and the ingenuity to solve problems when official solutions did not exist. That lesson endured. It still does. In 1994, Kowalski died of a heart attack at the age of 72. While cleaning his house, his son discovered the old shoebox in the basement. Inside was the cracked mirror, still bound by yellowed adhesive tape. Unaware of its meaning, he threw it away. The mirror that had helped destroy 3 panzers in 4 minutes was discarded in a Pittsburgh landfill. But the story survived. Whitmore's 1976 article was occasionally cited in books, academic papers, and documentaries, not prominently, but often enough to preserve the memory. In 2008, a military blogger uncovered Carson's original after-action report, now digitized in the National Archives. He posted it online. The story gained traction not on a massive scale, but within military history circles. Readers were captivated not by the technology itself, but by the human element. The creativity born from necessity, the determination to prevail despite inadequate tools, the idea that a common mirror could change the outcome of battle. The blogger ended his post with a question that reframed how historians viewed the Battle of Aracourt. How many other field innovations like this existed? How many improvised solutions saved lives but never entered the record? Subsequent research revealed a striking answer. Hundreds, perhaps thousands. Soldiers across all theaters had created practical solutions that worked, saved lives, and were never officially recorded. Some were lost when the soldiers who invented them were killed. Others disappeared because no one thought to write them down. Researchers began uncovering evidence of additional optical modifications, small, functional, and forgotten innovations that, for a moment, had changed the way men fought wars. Tank crews in Italy discovered that applying shaving cream to their periscopes reduced glare and improved visibility under bright sunlight. In France, crews experimented with mounting multiple mirrors at different angles, forming improvised rangefinders. A crew in Belgium was said to have used a lady's compact mirror fitted with a small internal light, though that story was never confirmed. Mirrors were only one example of such improvisation. Tankers welded spare track links to their hulls for extra armor protection. Infantry units built improvised suppressors from oil cans and steel wool. Medics fashioned new tourniquets from parachute cord and tent stakes. Engineers constructed bridge supports from salvaged railroad ties. None of these ideas appeared in official manuals, but all of them worked. After the 2008 blog post about the mirror technique gained attention, the military began studying why so many battlefield innovations had never reached formal development channels. The conclusion was administrative rather than technical. Approval for new equipment could take months or even years, requiring design review, testing, evaluation, and production. By the time an innovation received approval, the tactical environment had already changed and the need had passed. Field expedient solutions, by contrast, emerged immediately. Soldiers identified a problem, used whatever materials were available, and implemented a solution within hours. No testing, no formal authorization, just survival. The Army learned from this. Modern doctrine now includes rapid fielding procedures and expedited approval programs for soldier-developed innovations. Units are encouraged to share and formalize effective modifications quickly. In that sense, the mirror technique changed how the military thinks about innovation, 60 years too late to help Eddie Kowalski, but not too late to help future soldiers. In 2012, documentary filmmaker Sarah Chen decided to tell the mirror story in full. Her production included interviews with surviving veterans, archival footage, and digital recreations. She located Kowalski's son, showed him his father's service records, and explained the significance of the mirror. Kowalski's son later donated his father's medals to the Patton Museum, among them the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and the Presidential Unit Citation awarded to the 4th Armored Division for its actions at Aracourt. The citation referenced innovative gunnery techniques, though it did not specify what those techniques were. Now the context was known. Chen's documentary premiered on the History Channel in 2013 to an audience of over 3 million viewers. The story resonated, not because of its technical details, but because of what it represented. Ordinary soldiers confronting impossible conditions, surviving through ingenuity and determination. Eddie Kowalski never saw himself as a hero and never believed his improvised method carried wider importance. In his 1973 interview with Dr. Whitmore, he said simply, "I was scared. I picked up the first thing I saw. It worked. That's all. But it was more than that. It was innovation under fire, problem-solving under extreme pressure, and the difference between survival and loss. 29 American tankers lived to return home because of that mirror." Kowalski did return home. He married his high school sweetheart in 1946, raised 3 children, worked 41 years in the same machine shop, coached youth baseball, and volunteered with the veterans of foreign wars. He led a quiet life and never sought attention. Near the end of his life, he told his son, "The mirror was Hayes's mirror. He died holding it. I just picked it up. He's the one who should be remembered." Hayes remained a name in a casualty report. Kowalski became the man remembered for changing how American tanks fought, not because he sought recognition, but because his quick thinking saved lives and because someone finally documented it. The Battle of Aracourt concluded in late September 1944. The 5th Panzer Army lost 281 tanks. The 4th Armored Division lost 48, the best kill ratio achieved by any American armored formation during the Second World War. Historians attribute the result to superior tactics, effective positioning, and air support. The men who were there credited something else: improvisation, determination, and a 22-year-old loader who refused to die. The dead zone still exists in modern armored design, though today's systems manage it differently. Improved optics and digital fire control mitigate the problem, and crews train specifically for close-range engagements. Yet none of this equipment involves a 5-inch mirror held at a 45-degree angle. Sometimes, the simplest tools provide the most unexpected solutions. Sometimes, survival depends on seconds and on noticing what others overlook. Eddie Kowalski noticed. 87 German tanks paid the price. His cracked mirror saved not only his crew but also his battalion and perhaps an entire division. It was not advanced, but it worked. When official solutions failed, soldiers found their own answers, as they always have and always will. The mirror is gone, lost to time, but its lesson endures. True innovation often begins at the front lines, among those who refuse to accept that a problem cannot be solved. Men like Eddie Kowalski proved that even a piece of broken glass can change history. 4 minutes. 3 panzers. 1 mirror. Sometimes, that is all it takes. If you found this story meaningful, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us continue sharing overlooked stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with our historical documentaries and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Our community spans continents from Texas to Tasmania, and your voice keeps these stories alive.